The sun dipped low over the streets of Sacramento, casting the city in hues of gold and amber. Eric Porter was heading home after a long day at the office, his sedan humming quietly as he adjusted the air conditioning. The faint murmur of the radio played in the background, a soothing contrast to the bustling streets. He approached a yellow light, easing off the gas just as it flicked to red. That's when the flashing red and blue lights lit up behind him, the sharp wail of a siren breaking the evening calm. Eric glanced into his rearview mirror, his brow furrowing slightly. He pulled to the side of the road, rolling down his window as a police cruiser parked behind him. Out stepped Officer Bradley Larson, mid-30s, buzz cut, badge gleaming under the fading sunlight. His stride carried the confidence of a man accustomed to control. "License and registration," Larson said curtly, his tone flat but edged with authority. Eric complied without hesitation, retrieving his documents with deliberate, unhurried movements. Larson's gaze lingered on him, assessing, searching. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" the officer asked, leaning slightly toward the window. "I'm not entirely sure," Eric replied, his voice polite but firm. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," Larson stated, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Eric frowned slightly but gave a small nod. "I thought I slowed down in time, but I understand." Larson didn't immediately respond. Instead, he studied Eric a moment longer. Something shifted in his stance, a subtle change that suggested he had decided this was more than a routine stop. His eyes flicked to the license in his hand. "You're not from around here, are you?" Eric hesitated for the briefest moment. "I moved here a few months ago. My address is on the license." But Larson wasn't really listening. His questions began to sharpen, his scrutiny intensifying. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" "Just going home," Eric replied, his calm tone unwavering. But he could feel the shift in the air. This wasn't about a traffic stop anymore. Larson's posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "Step out of the car for me." Eric's grip on the steering wheel tightened briefly, though his expression remained neutral. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" Larson's lips twitched in something like a smirk before he masked it. "I asked you to step out. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." The unspoken threat hung between them. Eric exhaled slowly, then opened the door. As he stepped out, Larson sized him up, his tailored suit, polished shoes, an air of quiet precision. Yet none of that seemed to matter. "Hands where I can see them," Larson instructed. Eric complied. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" "Just routine," Larson replied, though his tone carried something else. "We've had some incidents around here. Can't be too careful." "Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans?" Eric asked, tilting his head slightly. "Or does this have more to do with something else?" The question landed like a punch. For a moment, Larson's composure wavered. His hand twitched near his belt. "Watch your tone," he said, voice hardening. "I'm simply asking a question," Eric replied evenly. No defiance, just controlled clarity. Larson stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You seem awfully familiar with how this works. Got something to hide?" Eric let the silence stretch before answering. "No, officer. I just believe in being clear about the reasons for an interaction like this. Transparency, you know?" Larson scoffed but didn't reply. He was off balance, thrown by Eric's composure. His authority wasn't having its usual effect. "You think you know what's going to happen next?" Larson muttered. "Like you're in control here?" "Confidence isn't the issue," Eric said quietly. "Respect is." Larson's expression flickered, the words hitting harder than he'd expected. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood," he ordered. "I need to check for weapons." Eric raised an eyebrow. "Weapons? Do I look like someone carrying a weapon?" Larson's jaw tightened. "I'm not going to ask again." A flicker of something unreadable passed across Eric's face. Then, without a word, he turned and placed his palms on the hood. The search was rough, lingering longer than necessary. A test. An assertion of dominance. "You're clean," Larson muttered, irritation evident in his tone. Eric turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Of course I am." Larson shifted, his frustration showing. "You seem to know a lot about what I can and can't do," he said. "You a lawyer or something?" Eric smiled faintly. "Or something." The ambiguity irritated Larson further. He stepped closer, voice dropping to a near growl. "You think you're smarter than me?" "I don't think anything, officer," Eric said. "I just believe in fairness. And so far, I'm not seeing much of it." The tension crackled between them. Larson opened his mouth, then hesitated. The power dynamic was shifting, and he was starting to realize he wasn't the one in control. Eric reached into his pocket, slowly, deliberately. "I'm reaching for my badge," he said calmly. "No need for theatrics." Larson's hand twitched near his holster, but he held back as Eric pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a gleaming badge. "Eric Porter," he said, his tone even. "Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division." Larson froze, eyes darting between the badge and Eric's face. His confidence crumbled, his authority suddenly meaningless. Eric took a step forward. "The troubling part of this interaction," he said, "it's not the profiling. It's not the escalation. It's the fact that you did all of this without even realizing who you were talking to." Larson swallowed hard, his face paling. He reached into his pocket, fumbling as he handed back Eric's documents, his hands trembling slightly. Eric took them, then met Larson's gaze one last time. "Remember this, Officer Larson," he said. "The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." As Eric drove away, his mind wasn't on the encounter itself. It was on what came next. The next morning, he sat at his desk, Larson's file open before him. Minor complaints. A history of misunderstandings. But this wasn't about one man. It was about a system that let men like him operate unchecked. It was time for that to change.